Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Stephen Hawks. He's the VP of Forest Resources at LandVest. Steve, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Kevin. Thank you.
Good stuff. And where are we reaching you today? I know you're a busy guy and traveling all over the place. Are you at home catching your breath, or are you on the road?
I'm in my office in Concord, New Hampshire.
Nice. Concord, New Hampshire. Perfect. Good stuff. So thanks for joining. And I'm pretty excited to have this conversation with you because knowing you for a few years, we've had lots of conversations, and you're one of those executives that also comes from a technical background and has been in the industry for a really long time. So it's going to be really neat to leverage your experiences, and your observations and where you see things going. But maybe to kick us off, I believe Penn State University was your alma mater in BC in forest science. But maybe how did you get into it? Is it something that was in the family and the DNA, or it was just a summer experience or something? But maybe tell us your journey on how you got into forestry.
Yeah, I think it's in the DNA. It's interestingly, my father worked for a paper company, Mead. He was not a forester. He was an executive for Mead in their Washington, D.C. office. But before that, my step-grandfather was a paper scientist at Mead, and actually he and his team developed a color reproduction process where the ink was impregnated on the paper, and different quantities of light were used to explode those ink capsules to do color reproduction. Unfortunately, that technology got passed up by quicker and cheaper technologies, and it never really made it to market. My father, or my grandfather on my mother's side, was also an agriculture teacher in the South. So I think that's really where I got it in the DNA. But my father, being in forest policy, I heard him talk about the issues that were related to forestry through, at the dinner conversations, and that got me inspired to become a forester. I actually started out studying computer engineering at Penn State, and decided that was not the path I wanted to continue. And when I made the switch to forestry, it was really a natural fit, and never looked back from there. But the interest in computer engineering sort of gave me my technical background that allows me to communicate. I don't get to use the tech like I used to, but it allows me to communicate with those that do and develop the tech. So.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. It's kind of funny because a lot of people I've chatted with, the true digital foresters, if there is such a thing with a very strong technical background, it seems like there's a pattern where at some point they were, dabbling with computer science or some type of engineering, and then just saw better, or maybe had a different calling, I guess, to the traditional forestry side or the pure forestry side of things. So thinking of that, I guess you started your journey, and then looking at your career, you worked at a couple of different places. I believe you even had your own woodlot at some point, and then worked quite a bit with LandVest. So maybe introduce our listeners to who LandVest is, because I believe there's a luxury real estate component, but also a timberland side. But what can you tell us about LandVest?
Yeah, we do have a luxury real estate component. We market high-end luxury second homes along the coast of Maine, Boston, all over New England, up into the Adirondacks and around Lake Champlain. And then the other half of our business is forest management and consulting. We currently manage about 2 million acres of forest land from Southwest Pennsylvania through the northern tip of Maine. The vast majority of that land is privately held, either through high net worth individuals, farmers, small woodlot owners, also some timberland investment management organizations, REITs. So the whole gamut of ownership, and the gamut of parcel size, from 50 acres on the low end to 850,000 acres on the high end.
Wow. So large land base there at 2 million acres there, spread across geographic diverse areas. And for our listeners and viewers, if for fun you're bored, not that they were ever bored, and looking for more screen time, I definitely encourage you to look at the LandVest luxury real estate side, because I get a kick every time it crosses my social media. They're beautiful homes, ones I could never afford, to be clear, but they're amazing to look at. These huge homes, on a hilltop or something, overlooking some water, and just absolutely gorgeous homes. And so very, very cool to watch there. So thinking of your role at LandVest right now, can you maybe describe to our listeners how you got to be where you are, because I suspect a lot of maybe younger foresters, they're boots in the dirt, right? And maybe they're not even thinking about being an executive, and you're pretty much, at that executive level as with your peers. And maybe tell us that journey. Like, did you think that you would be where you are today, looking back, maybe when you started your forestry career?
Certainly not. I started after college. I spent a couple of summers working out west doing inventory on national forests. Covered a lot of ground in Washington, Montana, Idaho, Missouri. Then I, came back from out west and worked for a small consulting forestry shop in a small town in Northwest Pennsylvania. I got to know a couple of the partners there through college, and I worked there for a couple of years. Decided to start my own business in 1996, and had my own business for about 7 years, managing small woodlots around the same region. That got me into a little bit more business sense and managing books and managing time and those sorts of things. I then went to work for a sawmill in north central Pennsylvania, Matson Lumber, managing their company-owned 30,000 acres, as well as procuring timber to feed the mills. And then in 2007, I came to work at LandVest as the Pennsylvania Regional Forester. LandVest had acquired the management of a large tract of timberland in north central Pennsylvania. It was owned by a college endowment investment. So it really exposed me to financial reporting and that sort of work that was important to keep that client happy. They were as much focused on that part of it as on the forest management. That for the first time I had employees and learned to manage those challenges, and then it's just been sort of a natural progression up through several different job titles to my current position. It wasn't really anything that I sought, but we're a small enough company that if you focus on doing your job well, you get recognized for it and then asked to move up. So that's been my path.
Yeah, very cool. I guess at the end of the day, the same old rule of thumb works: put your head down, work hard, do great work, and you'll be recognized by your leaders. Although I chuckled when you said, as you have employees and dealing with those challenges, I always love hearing how people describe the people side of things, which is sometimes the most entertaining, exciting, or frustrating parts of being a leader. Now, you had mentioned within the timberland side of things, there was the services side and the forestry consulting. And when we look at the website, one way I guess I would describe it to someone maybe not in forestry, it's like maybe full service shop. Like, there's pretty much everything that you guys do. Is there a particular part of the business, maybe as we think about through time over the last maybe 20 years to where we are now, there's been a transition, maybe one that's intentional, or one you've seen, or maybe one that's kind of taken shape by external factors? What can you describe about your technology journey, I guess, from the early days? And again, I know you're not an old grandfather, but in terms of your career, you're well 20, 30 years, right, in this business, if not more. But what can you share to our listeners in terms of what the world looked like back in the early days as it comes to technology?
Yeah, so it's been 30 years, and it's been an amazing transition, really. My early work was compass and paper maps and pacing and all day, nothing but that for navigation and dead reckoning and recording on paper. And once I landed in a full-time job, that company had a handheld data recorder, and we called it the brick. It was about the size and the weight of a brick. But it worked. It worked every single day. The battery lasted all day, had a heater in it to keep the battery from going dead too fast. And that really introduced me to the efficiencies involved in technology. And I've never looked back. I mean, as soon as I had my own business, I could afford to buy a data recorder. I did. And maybe it doesn't save a ton of time in the woods, but it saves a ton of time in the office. And we always like to say, you make the money in the woods. You send the invoice from the office, but you have to be efficient in the woods. And so spending the time in the woods is the key. And then from there, it's just, curve of technology advancement is so steep that it just happens daily. And now we're on to navigating using a tablet, and that's integrated with forest inventory software, and then that's integrated with the forest management software. And we're looking into other technologies, and the tools that our foresters use now are so much different. We're using Hageloff 360s with both the sonar and laser distance measuring devices, and there's so many functions of that. And the foresters enjoy it, and they enjoy having those efficiencies in their daily schedule. I've added up the cost of the technology that any one of our foresters may be carrying in a day, and it's roughly $6,000 to $7,000 of electronics, and there's potential failures that come along with that. So they know how to get out of the woods with a compass and a map, or at least a PDF map on their phone. But day to day, that's what's created efficiencies and allows them to do their job well.
Yeah, amazing. It makes me think of I remember at an SAF, a Society of American Foresters conference way back. I think Steve Weiland, when he was writing for them, he was tasked with presenting on what forestry might look like, or a digital forester, what they might look like. And he had the lightning EV truck, and the forester gets out with his tablet, and then a drone comes off the back bed, and then he's got all this gear. And I think this maybe 10 years ago, and I think some of us, or quite a few people, might have had a chuckle going like, that's not going to happen. But as you've described, it's probably pretty bang on, maybe minus the Ford Lightning or whatever big truck, the battery side of things, but it's quite fascinating there. So thinking of that journey, maybe from the way things were, because believe it or not, when my kids they'll do some orienteering work, and then they'll actually have a compass. And I remember the first time they held one, they're like, what the hell is this, Dad? I'm like, it's called a compass, kid. And like, what do you mean, what the hell is this? And they're like, isn't there an app on my smartphone to do that? I'm like, no, it's like, you need to learn these like basic skills, right? And that was an eye-opener. But thinking of that journey from where things were to now, would you say there were some key definitive moments, core technologies that really moved the industry forward? Or do you think it was maybe just a gradual or perpetual innovation or continuous innovation at play? What's your thesis, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's been a little bit of a roller coaster. There's been some ups and downs with a steady improvement, but some of the older stuff worked better, to be honest, and including on software. And that, like I said, that brick was rugged. It worked, and it was all keypad entry, no touch screen, no tap screen. And it worked every day. And that is come and gone a little bit. Touch screen's a little harder to use in weather. Raindrops falling on them, snow landing on them. We work in temperature ranges from -40 to +90, and that technology can't always do that. I had a forester call me a few years ago and said, my handheld won't work. I said, what's the temperature? She said, -40. And I said, well, maybe you shouldn't be working. And she said, no, I want to work. And so she went to the convenience store and got some of those hand warmers and stuck them in the case behind the battery, and she got her work done that day. That's been a limiting factor. I think it's also, there was as GPS came on board, it moved from its own device to be incorporated with other devices. Some of those were pretty darn accurate, and now tablets and phones that are the standard aren't as accurate as some of those devices that we used 10 years ago. So now we're supplementing those with Bluetooth, GPS antennas at a much higher cost. But so it's been some give and take, through the years. But and memory becoming so cheap, and I'm going to really date myself here. My first hard drive had a 10 megabyte, or my first computer had a 10 megabyte hard drive. And I would have to unload programs to upload other programs to, and it was all 5.25 floppy. So it was, if I wanted to do word processing, I might have to clear the program out to do something else, and then switch back. So the cost and the capacity of computers is mean, that's been the stalwart and the baseline of everything. You know, first computer cost $4,000 and it didn't do anything. And color monitor meant I could switch from black and white to yellow. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think some of our listeners are probably either asking what is a 5 1/4 floppy disk there. Then there's probably another group going like 5 1/4. You weren't in the 3.5, days. Like what's
5 1/4 was before 3.5.
that's amazing. And obviously, I'm dating myself since I remember those things as well. But I guess maybe I'd be curious to know your thoughts, like your comments around. There was technology back that worked. It was rugged, purpose built. Some of it, as you said, might have worked better than what's generally available. One might think that those companies would have doubled down or tripled down. They've got something good and expanded their portfolio and made that brick, maybe lighter or maybe a different color or something. What happened to those companies, or why do you? I'm assuming they're not around anymore. But what's your thoughts on maybe why they went away? Is it just economies of scale, unit costs of consumer market things, or do you think there's some other reason or some other factors at play?
I think it's those things, and we've heard through the grapevine that the mold for an injection mold of the housing of the device, the mold alone is $50,000. Well, that's a lot of units you got to sell to recover that cost, and that's probably a limiting factor in our sector. Now, I don't really understand why technology from other sectors couldn't be used in the forest industry, and we really don't see it that much. There are, and maybe it's the climate and issues that are a problem, but a lot of inventory work is done in retail stores and grocery stores electronically, and the devices could be the same except for the ruggedness that we need on a daily basis. So maybe that's been the limiting factor, is just making it rugged. I mean, there are devices out there that are rugged, and we buy some of them. It's just they're expensive, and we found that some of the middle of the road tablets that are rugged, in air quotes, are almost disposable. About $400, which you don't want to throw away $400, but a day's data on that device is more valuable than the device itself. And as long as we can recover the data and we can keep those in stock, we keep them on hand, replace them when they get damaged, and we don't get upset about it. We just hand off a new one and get back to work.
Yeah, amazing. The data on the device is more for that day is more valuable than the device itself. Love that saying. That's powerful saying. Also, I think then on the LandVest website, you got to add the third pillar that you have the Best Buy arm. So if you're keeping all these tablets in stock, you can go ahead and like basically sell them to your foresters and game them. But love foresters hearing their stories, because again, your example there with like the pocket warmers, I guess, like breaking them up that normally used for skiing, right? And the forester thinking, oh, like just put these in the back. Just ingenious. Foresters are just ingenious all the time. Always amazed. So I'd be curious. I'm going to maybe take us down a little path, just given what's happening in my neck of the woods and getting your thoughts. And then we'll maybe do a little detour and then come back to the technology side. Since again, you being an exec, I know you're always thinking time horizons that are different than the average Joe or Jane. So in my neck of the woods, we were talking before this call, we've got fires in Quebec, BC, Alberta, just the gong show, and even East Coast Canada. And then I think in the US Northeast, maybe a couple fires, nothing significant major yet, but still early. But the themes I want to kind of get your thoughts on is, one, with your portfolio of clients, climate is obviously, I suspect, a key discussion point, or maybe one that's constantly rearing its head, and as well with your ESG commitments and all that stuff. What's your outlook, I guess, on how you're viewing the landscape now, with all these fires happening? Is this just something that we knew was bubbling, the scientists saying the frequency of these extreme events are going to happen more? And I know a lot of foresters have very strong opinions and passions on the role of forester and forestry in mitigating some of these climate change. But how much does your organization and your clients talk climate, and is it maybe one of the number one topics for you these days versus the traditional, timber and how you're going to get it out of the woods and to market?
It is a big subject of conversation. We don't worry too much about fire in the forest that we manage. There may be some small one-off fires started by a electric line or we had a railroad spark a few years ago in Pennsylvania, but not large scale. It's typically it's mostly hardwood forest. It's high moisture content. You know, in the property, the southernmost property that we manage, Pennsylvania, the average is 8 fire days a year. So unlikely that there's actually an ignition source in that same time frame. And there are fires, but not significant. Although, you know, New Jersey pine barrens just had 50,000 acres burn last week. Different you know, forest type altogether. And the forests don't count on fire. I mean, that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that there are tree species that do not regenerate without a fire. The cones don't open, so therefore the seed doesn't come out unless it's heated. The mineral soil needs to be exposed, so the duff needs to be eliminated so that the seed makes contact with that mineral soil and germinates. That's, you know, typically softwood forest. But the side of the climate discussion that we are having every day is about carbon and the forest's ability to sequester and store carbon and all of the implications that come along with that. And we are seeing a shift in a reduction in harvest levels that our clients are more focused on maintaining or sequestering more carbon on their forests. So they want to reduce harvest levels to do that. And many of them are able to monetize that through a carbon development project with one of the big carbon developers. So it's a big part of what we do. And we have focused on inventory subject to carbon protocols. And we've been doing that as long as anybody. You know, these forests need to be re-inventoried every 6 years for the carbon protocols. And we are on our third inventory for some properties, same property. So, you know, we've been doing it for 12 or more years, the forest inventory part of it. That's a very difficult inventory, very strenuous, detailed measurements that have to be done right to pass the verification and allow our clients to sell that carbon value.
Yeah, interesting. And I know I've chatted with a few, you know, folks on the carbon space, and I'd be curious to know, you know, probably maybe a month or two, even in terms of the verification side of things, there's a bit of, I don't want to say hoopla, if that's the right word, but bit of consternation around, simply put, who's right, I guess, in terms of some of these numbers. And with your boots on the ground, I guess, from what I'm hearing, it's like you're not necessarily always looking at, you know, some advanced magical technology to solve the problem, but traditional cruising, I'm assuming, and doing that work. But what are your thoughts on the state of the carbon market and the readiness of it? Is some of the people's concerns, especially as we invoke, you know, ESG, and then, you know, the washing or whatever washing term you want to use, do you think there's still a lot of room to go, or do you think we're pretty much in a good space on that front?
I think there's some room to go. I think the options available to landowners to market their carbon are challenging options. It's a long-term commitment. And, you know, on the short end, it's 40 years. On the long end, it's 100 of a commitment. Now, you know, forests are managed for long-term benefits, and we make decisions every single day that may last 100 years. And if you're locked into a commitment for that sort of time frame, your options may be limited, and people may be willing to commit for their own lifetime or their next generation, but to schedule out 3 generations of commitment is difficult. So I'd love to see a shorter term carbon development come out. There have been some shorter ones. They didn't hold up, but I think there's still room for that, you know, 10 to 20 year commitment that people could probably really get behind.
Right.
Maybe the carbon value is lower, but that's okay. I mean, that's the decision the landowner wants to have. They want to have options, and so I'd love to see something in that in that
Yeah,
context.
yeah. So I'm hearing from you, it's almost like the people, your clients, like they're coming to the table with some of these concerns and thinking about it, which is great to hear. And I know when you mentioned, there might be like one or two or three generations. I'm just curious whether those are successfully agreed upon. Is there a pattern where you've got multiple generational people at the table thinking that way, or is it just all over the place? It could be one generation making that decision for future ones. Is there a certain pattern, just out of curiosity, in what works?
I don't think there's any pattern. It's all of the above. We've had an experience, long-term experience with a client that was, a single individual making most of the decisions. He's since passed, and his sons have taken over the ownership, and they're making different decisions. The first, they're making decisions that were talked about a few years ago, but they were never enacted. And I think that newer generations they've come up differently. They've been exposed to different uh, things and different concerns and different environmental discussions, and they think a little differently, and so they want to explore all those options. So it's a hot topic.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of hand holding involved in those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of warnings posted.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So thinking of the business, if we come back to maybe the technology, the central theme of this, I'm going to assume there's some GIS technology at play, remote sensing. What can you tell us about some of the core technologies that LandVest uses to drive its business? Is it that different than other companies, using Esri technology or things like that, or is there some special sauce that you guys are driving?
I don't think it's any different. I mean, we're certainly leveraging the SV technologies. We have a four-person GIS shop that they're focused on maintaining and managing our geodatabase and all that goes with that. Uh, Traditionally, we've built our own database programs in-house. We have one individual who's quite skilled at building database applications. I think the number is 17 application
Wow.
that he's built over the years. They've served us extremely well. They're all access based. Uh, they've served us well, but a couple problems. One is there's one person who is charged with maintaining those. That's risky. The second is that when you build something yourself, like a database, it will do exactly what you built it to do. And it may do that extremely well, but it never exposes you to something you didn't know you could do. And so we've shifted over the last 4 years to buying off-the-shelf programs that are customizable to suit our needs. And my mantra in those decisions, and not just about software and hardware, but also about people, is making decisions that could take us in a direction we didn't know we could go. And ultimately, that's what's led us to this conversation, Kevin. We've also found that partnering with a company, choosing the team is just as important as choosing the product. And that's where we've gotten to know Lynn Geomatics, got to know you and your folks, and that's the type of team that we've wanted to partner with for years. And we finally found what we feel is the right slot for us. You guys are going in directions we didn't know we could go, and we're along for the ride. And that comes from you being exposed to all those other clients that ask for things, and that turns on the light bulb in your heads, and then that makes that available to us. That's something we didn't think about. So we're able to think outside of our own organization by connecting to companies and people, like you.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, no, it's amazing, and sometimes maybe we get stuck in doing how things we've always done them, and sometimes we need a jolt from the side. Yeah, I remember there's some meetings where sometimes even smaller, like just even having four people from four different companies, not a tremendous big user group in itself, was powerful because of the cross fertilization of ideas and connecting. 1+1 = 3 without even realizing that when you're thinking it was two. And I kind of chuckle because as a leader, at some point, is it really about the technology, or is it really building the best team? And having the best team and the best people, you got to have good technology, but maybe with the best team, Even with good technology, you can do great things. I don't know. I always joke on my side, my analogies comes down to building a house, building a sports team or building a car, one of those three. And beyond that, I have no analogies. But thinking of that journey, it's fascinating. So going from the custom, and I think a lot of our listeners are either still building custom applications, some are full COTS, and then some are maybe, the configure first before the buy scenario. Was that change of thinking something driven from you in your leadership and executive role, or would you say on one side smooth sailings, everybody jumped on board and said, Steve, this is a great idea, let's forget about our 17 access databases and go this way? What's fun stories, we'll call them that, can you share with us in that journey of creating that transformation or that change within LandVest?
Yeah, I think it came from me, when I took this position 4 years ago, and that's when we started the transition. It came from attending a conference 4 years ago, and to learn about a log management software and a settlement, log settlement process software. And I was exposed at that point in time to all the other things that can attach to this software that, like, oh, we can do that? Well, think about the efficiency that adds to our business. And, we're moving 30,000 loads of forest products every year. And somebody handwrites a ticket to associated with every one of those truckloads. That can go away. And how do we get to that going away? Because it's very difficult to find people. It's very difficult to train people. That's very expensive. And I think, if we can, remove some of the mundane tasks that people have to accomplish every day and make their lives easier, that's the direction we need to be going. And so that, just sort of exposed to it once, and then it's like, well, if that can do this, then, the world's our oyster. We can be asking other things. And
yeah, absolutely. So I'm sensing or hearing, workforce is also, I think everybody I've talked to we're having a good workforce, a talented workforce, one that's constantly, people coming in, staying, moving on and whatnot. It sounds like that's a challenge for you as well as everyone else, it seems like, in the industry.
it is, yeah. We have 65 employees in the Forest Resources Division. We always have an opening. And so sometimes it's too many openings, and keeping good people, engaging good people is the number one challenge that we face these days. And I think it's curiosity somewhat. People want to try different things, and so do I. I don't want to try too many new things now. But so if they stay 2 or 3 years, they want to go try something else. And but recently we've been able to attract a few back, which has really been big wins for us. They worked for us for a little while, went off and explored something, and realized the grass wasn't greener. And when we had the opportunity to welcome them back, they had come back stronger than they left, and with a renewed passion for what they do. And a couple of them into different roles than they were originally in, and we're getting more than we bargained for out of a couple of people that came back. And so that's a challenge. Number one challenge is to find and retain good talent.
Yeah, for sure. And I suspect often it's not just the financial lever. I don't know if your experience is like ours, where we'll have very young staff that say, what, thanks for this opportunity, but I'm going to try something else. And then, in a friendly way, like, oh, well, what's the next thing? And the answer is, I'm going camping. And I'm like, okay, great. But what are you doing after camping? I don't know. I'll figure it out. Which is kind of like, don't most people figure it out first and then do the camping and then they go to the next thing? But it's just so different. And I know one time we talked a couple months ago, you folks were really big on doing the community outreach and going to the schools and creating, special days where you can bring the students out to the woods, the field. Has that been a recipe that's led to success, or has it kind of partially achieved, or or has it really created something that's a nice funnel for people coming in? I'm just curious to know with those efforts whether they're paying dividends.
Yeah, I think it's a little early to tell. We've been doing it over the last couple of years. This year we did two, one in New Hampshire and one in northern Maine, and a total attendance of 800 to 900 high school students at those two events.
800 to 900?
Yes, yeah, yeah. So big events, all day, and many booths. And what's, it's a little difficult for us, and we were able to control a little better this year. But last year at the one in New Hampshire, we were next to the mini excavator demo. Well, the kids are really interested in seeing that mini excavator. They don't want to come over to our booth and talk about forestry. So we were able to say, well, we don't want to be next to the equipment this year. And so I think we got a lot more interest and a little more discussion, a more intimate conversation with a few. I let the younger folks in the company do these things, attend these things. I think they connect better to high school students than I do. And so I encourage them to get out there. I did it when I was younger and, spoke in schools and elementary schools. It's too early to tell whether we've had any impact. I hope we have. And really, we aren't expecting to say this person's going to be the next LandVest employee. We're trying to inspire and influence young people to get into the forestry sector. And that will help us someday. It may be some other company that benefits from our participation, but we may benefit from somebody else's. And we look at diversity the same way, that there's not a lot of diversity in schools in New England. And we'd love to have more opportunities for diversity in the forestry sector. We probably can't influence that significantly in New England. So we'll do what we can here. Maybe we'll inspire another company to do something somewhere else. And at some point in time, we'll all benefit from that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And yeah, no, fascinating to hear that you don't know what the ROI, if we even call it that, is, but as opposed to like a greater good and maybe it'll spark a couple collisions here or there. Or alternatively, you guys just need to buy a big machine and deck it out with LandVest swag and decals, and you'll have like everybody coming, right? And give a new heads-up display or something and have some fun with that. So thinking of the workforce, looking forward at some other technologies, every time we hear about workforce, people start talking about AI. What does AI mean to you? And again, as your seat, at the table up high in LandVest, is that something that the leadership's thinking about and how it could benefit or maybe disrupt forestry further, or is it too early? And you want to see how things unfurl in other sectors with AI? What does AI mean to you and LandVest?
I don't think it's too early, and we're investigating opportunities. We have worked on one AI ML project. That was a forest piping project where all of the data was publicly sourced, and stand lines and stand types were applied to a 1 million acre forest. It may not be perfect. It was high value because the cost was low compared to the traditional methods. So you have to understand what the product is. It was interesting process for the foresters involved. They had to rethink, because we're not looking at the aerial photos ourselves. We're talking about how to teach a computer to do it, and computers thinking binary. And so it had to make one decision at a time. And we have to develop the order of operations for those decisions. It's most important to divide these two things first: softwood, hardwood. Fall short. When you look at an aerial photo as a forester, traditionally, all that pops out of your head at once. Oh, there's the stand line. You don't think about, well, those are taller, those are shorter, those are softwood, hardwood. You just know it. That the computer doesn't know that. So it was a very interesting project for us to get involved in. And I think on the inventory side is where we're going to see more technology, use of drones with sensors. I just attended a couple of conferences over the last 2 weeks and got exposed to some technology that I didn't know was available yet. And being able to count trees with a drone image, that's what it's all about. Then we can go out and measure trees and create a sample of some of those measurements, and then the accuracy comes from the accurate count of trees. If that can be accurate from a drone, that's great. We're willing to invest in those technologies moving forward if it's a clear return on investment. I think the speed at which we can deploy an inventory could happen faster if we had some technology like that. Pulling a team of foresters together to travel to a far off land and execute a project that's a project in and of itself, is to get them all together and get it all to happen. So if it's just one or two with a drone, and then some calibration with some plots on the ground, boots on the ground, that may be, in some circumstances, may be a very efficient way to deploy inventory projects.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I feel like after this podcast, you're going to get inundated by job applicants or drone vendors who want to sell this, or EV truck makers, who knows? But you'll have to tell me how that goes forward. So fascinating to hear the technology kind of, you're thinking about it, what it could mean for forestry. And I'm wondering, before we shift into maybe the far future, are there any pro tips you would give other foresters or forestry companies trying to start their journey with digital transformation, for lack of better word, or I hate modernizing because it makes it sound like you're kind of in the dark ages, as opposed to you're consciously choosing to look at how you've been doing business and strategically choosing certain areas to focus on, and maybe add a little bit of grease here and make things run smoother. But are there any speed bumps that you ran into that you think back and go like, gee whiz, it's like, had I known that, I could have saved myself maybe a lot of pain, or my people a lot of pain? But is there a Steve Hawks top 3 things you should think about before you start going down this path of embracing new technology?
Yeah, a couple things. One I already said is that the team is as important as the product, and I stand by that. We've learned from the mistakes in the past, and not choosing the right team, even though the product may have been, at the time, a better product. Providing, honest feedback, to your vendors or potential vendors. The technology turns over so fast, as we've discussed, that you don't know, in 3 to 5 years, you may be looking to replace the technology you bought 3 to 5 years ago, and providing feedback to the second place, vendor in your selection process may pay off for you. That has worked for us. And then early on, and maybe it's still true, screen taps equal dollar sign. So every time you touch the screen, it costs you money. So the more efficient you can get the data into the device, whatever device that is, the more efficient it will be. I can't tell you what the dollar sign amount is, but just think about that. If you want to compare 2 products, it took me 20 taps to enter this tree on this device and this product, and on this one it took 12. Well, if you're measuring several hundred trees a day, multiply that out, and that's real money. I don't believe any of the devices, any of the hardware devices that we've purchased over the last 5 to 10 years have not panned out. The devices have been good. They've all saved us time, saved us money. It doesn't take long to justify the cost of a $2,500 device if you get a few more plots done in a day. And in carbon inventory, where they really pay off, it's only a couple of plots a day that a plot a day over several days, and you paid for it. And trust but verify. When you shift to technology, electronic measuring devices, they're going to give you a result. You've still got to use your head. You've still got to look at that number and say, there's no way that tree is as tall as the device tells me it is. Something went wrong. You can't just rely on that without, giving it the check.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I love that thinking because it always reminds me back when GPS, came out and we are using them in cars, and you'd see the newspaper, some schmo drove down the stairs or something. And as great as the technology is, like we still have brains and we need to leverage them, right? We can't,
Right.
solve ourselves with that decision making. So as we kind of look forward, I know Apple just recently did like an announcement. They've got their what is it called? Vision Pro augmented reality, like fantastic product positioning, right? Like how to avoid augmented reality, the term virtual reality, all the pluses and minuses maybe that comes with the term. And they came up with spatial computing and this headset, and it's not cheap. It's like I think $3,500 or something. But clearly they're thinking in the future, just as others have tried. What would be your comment to other leaders maybe that are thinking about this, that might look at like this Apple device or whatever the device is and maybe shrug it off or laugh it off? Like Apple's a big player, and but others have tried it, Google glasses and other things like that. But in your experiences in your career today, and again sitting at that vice president level, that C-suite level, how do you take that information? Like maybe walk us through, when you see these announcements, like is it immediate excitement? Is it immediate like I don't know what to do with it, I need to like ask others, or is it like a puzzle piece is just falling in place for you in this thing you're working in your head? Like walk us through the thinking there as these announcements come out. What do you do with that information at your level?
Yeah, I guess I tiptoe into the water a little bit and I wait for it to settle out. You know, the early conversations about this technology are often way over my head, and to be honest, so I sort of wait till it gets dumbed down to my level, and then people are talking about how it can apply to the forest industry or a similar industry. I have a couple people on my staff who are always looking at these things. Our director of GIS and our director of inventory and analytics, they're both very techy, and they are always looking at these products and technologies, and they're thinking the same way. They're thinking, how can this benefit us? And whether it's now or it's, we better keep an eye on this one for a little while and see where it goes. Apple has been successful. So when they, come up with a new technology or a new way of thinking, you're going to get on board at some point in time. Sooner or later, you got to get on the train because the train's going down the track. And that's the direction we'll be headed. Apple, Google, the other real innovators in technology, they're going to take us a direction, and we have to learn how to adapt to it and use it to improve our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things I've been trying to figure out is, and it's a broad theme of just how media communicates with things. Because even with this announcements from Apple, right away, I think on the Twitterverse there was like, oh, obviously no one's ever worn this thing for 12 hours. I think implying that ergonomically it's probably not comfortable. But and even as we thought about Elon and his big Starship taking off and then blew up, and mainstream media is saying it's a failure and stuff. And in reality, if they actually look at that story, the goal was not to blow up the launch pad. Like anything other than that was fine, and it was actually blown up intentionally because they were stressing the ship to figure out what was going on. So it actually went all according to plan, despite what the mainstream media was saying. And that part's always stuck with me, because as foresters and learning about new technology, where you consume this information, I think really matters. Because if you're just listening to certain sources of truth, you might get a different view, just as the Starship blowing up and thinking that was a bad thing. Are there any trusted sources that you go to? I know you said you go to a couple of conferences, but are there certain events that are happening? Because I know I know you're going out to the Association of Consulting Foresters. There's a SAF technology conference in Baton Rouge in August. But is there a go-to thing that you go to, or is it really going to Zach or someone of your directors saying, "Hey, what's going on here"? Any for those who are looking or craving to learn more, how would you advise them to go about finding the latest and greatest in the best objective way possible?
Yeah, I like to attend the Associated Consulting Foresters Conference as often as possible. It's in a great location this year, so in Eugene, Oregon. So I'm looking forward to the trip. Excuse me. Uh, and we do some business with Trimble. Trimble's a big innovative company, 13,000 employees across the world. Just attended their user conference a couple weeks ago. I had been 4 years ago. The previous one, obviously, COVID interrupted the biennial. Learned a lot there. We are connected to hardware and software vendors that are informing us. Hey, we got this new thing. You want to take it for a test drive? I liked it. And the vendors that just demo at these conferences are part of it, but also attending the conferences and talking to the other people there who've had similar experiences or different experiences and finding out what works. I've got a couple of people I called, what are you guys using these days? And they're going to give me an honest response. And maybe it doesn't change my mind, but at least I know what I'm getting into. And okay, well, that didn't work for you, but that doesn't mean it won't work for us in our systems. So just, a little bit of reading, few, forestry source from SAF. I get an ArcGIS magazine once a month. That I don't even have an ARC license. GIS didn't exist in the public sector when I was in college. They walked us through the GIS lab, said this is the future, but it was all military grade at the time. So I just, staying plugged in and staying plugged into people who are plugged in.
For sure, for sure. Now, out of curiosity, from left field, digital events, in-person events, what's your preference?
Oh, in person. Absolutely in person. And the organic conversation doesn't happen in a digital event. We returned to the office. We didn't close offices. I don't worry about productivity. I worry about creativity by not being in the same room. And I know of stories of innovators who designed their offices to have the people around the outside, but all the core central functions of the office were in the middle. So you had to walk by somebody else's desk to go to the bathroom, to go get a cup of coffee, to go get a snack. And something might be discussed in that conversation that you might think that's interruptive of the day, but maybe you have 30 seconds of brainstorming that takes you in a direction you didn't know you could go. And so, I think being back together is important. And so I'm fully on board with going back to conferences and seeing old friends and having a beer and shaking hands.
Yeah, I love that. Focused on productivity, not focus on productivity, but focus on creativity. Yeah, I think that's maybe a Forster's DNA. This virtual thing just don't work so good. It did its job when we needed to do, but yeah, it's time to go back to full normal. Yeah. So as we look to wind out, I definitely thank you for giving me an hour of your time, because I know you're a super busy guy. As we wind down, I'm just curious. We talked about your career, your journey, and what's the future look for you? Like, you're at a VP level now. I know you mentioned it kind of came about. Is there a next step? As we mature, as we say it, right? Mature versus mature. We start thinking about different things. But what's the outlook for Stephen Hawks, VP of Forest Resources, look like? What's the next mountain you want to climb, or dragon you want to slay, or is there something that you want to get done in the not so far future?
Yeah, I think it's more about providing the right tools for our staff. I say my number one job is to provide the resources to let them do their job well. And there's a military saying that I think is boots, bullets, and chow. And so I think that's right. Is work hard, play hard, create a company culture that is inviting and welcoming and accepting. We like to work hard, but we like to have some fun together. So that's been a great experience, and I'd like to do more of that. I don't really have any personal goals beyond knocking down a few hurdles. As far as advancement in my career, I love my job most days. I would love to eliminate the paper trick ticket. As I said, I don't think that's a reality, but to greatly reduce the data entry, the manual data entry, is a big goal, and I think that is achievable, and in a short time. I mean, we've got the foundation built. That's a major next step for us, and looking forward to moving in that direction.
For sure, for sure. Well, for those folks who want to get a hold of you, what's the best way? Is it email? Is it LinkedIn? Is it website? How do folks follow up with you if they want to reach out to as a vendor, as someone looking for new opportunities, or someone seeking guidance or advice? How's the best way to get a hold of you, Steve?
Email is the best. Email is shawkes@landvest.com. I am not into social media, so I have a LinkedIn page, and obviously you pointed out that it's out of date. So that tells you how often I keep up with it. So email is the best way to get a hold of me, and I'm happy to respond and talk to anybody, and particularly young folks considering getting into forestry and might need a little nudge or want to hear what it really is.
Yeah, for sure. Love it. Absolutely. For our listeners, who want to, it's not often you get a VP who's, willing to spend time with you and have a conversation. So definitely encourage you to reach out to Steve and tap into his experience and his knowledge. So Steve, thanks so much for joining me on this podcast. Love the conversation. I'm sure we can chat for another hour, but definitely the next time we'll be over a soda pop in hand, in person versus this digital thing. But just wanted to thank you for carving out some time for this guy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it too.
Awesome. Thanks. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.